Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to read parts of C.W. Hobley's book, Bantu Beliefs and Magic. And in these parts, he shows us the parallels that exist between the way the Akamba and the Akikuyu used to do their sacrifices and how the ancient Israelites used to do their sacrifices, of course, based on the text that we find in the Old Testament of the Bible. Now, when I was reading this part of Hobley's book, I was shocked, to be honest, and a realization came to me that probably I have been very wrong for some time or for a very long time. I remember there was a time I was arguing with a few people online about them making the argument that actually the ancient Hebrews are Bantu people, even though I don't like the word Bantu people being used to describe the genetics of the people. But I get what it means, or I get what people mean when they use the word Bantu people, and to some extent at least, not entirely. And I've been arguing with these people, and to be honest, at some point I would think that there is something wrong with their minds. You know what I mean. Don't want to use the word that might get the video into some problems. But reading Hobley's book, now I'm thinking maybe they are right, at least to some extent. And I need to point out that Hobley was a British administrator who came to East Africa in 1890s. He was brought by the Imperial British East Africa Company. Now, this is the company that came in 1880s or 1870s to East Africa, and it was tricking the local people into transferring the rights of the use of the land to this company. And then this company went back to Britain and then made a claim or told the British government that, see, we have the right to use the entire of East Africa. They called it the East Africa Protectorate then. That's the land that today is known as Kenya. And of course, at some point, they handed over the East Africa Protectorate to the British government. That was in 1895. Later on in the 1920s, the East Africa Protectorate was made into the Kenyan colony. Now, C.W. Hobley at some point stopped working for the Imperial British East Africa Company, and he was hired by the British government to become an administrator. And he served in the western part of Kenya. He was a provisional commissioner. And we've gone through another document that he wrote, and it was a document about the people of eastern Uganda. During that time, the area between the current border between Kenya and Uganda up to Naivasha was considered to be eastern Uganda. And it is that part where he served as a British administrator. Later on, he was moved to what today we call the eastern part of Kenya, specifically Ukambani, and he became an administrator there. And it was during the time that he was in Ukambani that he seems to have collected a lot of information from the Akamba people and then the Agikuyu. There is no evidence that he became an administrator over the Akikuyu people, but he makes claims that he did go into that community or that nation, and he requested and he was allowed to be initiated into the Akikuyu. We can call it the Akikuyu Kiama, as it is called. Then he says it is through that he was able to collect some information from the Akikuyu. And he also says that by him being initiated into the Akikuyu Kiama, it made it easier for the elders of the Akamba to give him information, as long as, or when he told them that I've been initiated into the Akikuyu Kiama, then the Akamba elders became a little bit relaxed and told him some of the things that they were not supposed to tell him. Now, we will never know how far he went into getting info, because among the Akikuyu, there are different levels of initiation. And I think it's Dr. Liki, who says that he was also initiated, but he was told that there is a level he could not go beyond. And for Liki, he says, I did not get all the information because the elders told me, yeah, you have been initiated, but you can be initiated up to a certain level, and there is a point from which we cannot initiate you because you are not an indigenous Kikuyu. Now, in this book, Hobley writes very interesting things about the belief system of the Akikuyu and the Akamba. And one of the things that he does, he describes the different practices. And in this video, we are going to focus on the sacrificial practices. And then he makes the effort at least to go pick a biblical text and compare it with that practice. And some of these are very interesting similarities, that they are so similar that you are left wondering, were the Akamba and the Akikuyu at least got these practices from the ancient Hebrews, or were they part of that society before they went away? So there are so many questions that arise. Of course, there are people who are going to say that the Kamba and the Kikuyu were part of that ancient society. And others, of course, will make the claim that they acquired those practices from others who are part of that society. And some places, Hobley makes the argument that some of these things are accidental, basically. But we're going to look at them. Now, one incident where he draws the parallels between how the ancient Israelites did their sacrifice and how the Kikuyu did it, and I'm going to also to mention a few that are related to the Akamba, is in regard to how the sacrificial lamb, and it was lamb actually among the Akikuyu especially. The Kambas did use goats, but the Akikuyu specifically used sheep. How the sheep for sacrifice was killed is so similar to how it was done in the ancient Israel. And this is what he says. He says that the sheep is then suffocated by clasping its muzzle. Maybe the suffocation part is debatable. As soon as it is insensible, but before it is actually dead, its throat is pierced by the sacrificial knife, and the blood is collected in half guard called kinga, mentioned above. The blood is then poured out at the foot of the sacred tree. Now, Hobley goes into quoting a verse in the Bible. He says, "Thou shalt slay the ram, and thou shalt take his blood and sprinkle it around upon the altar." So that's what is found in Exodus chapter 29, if I'm not wrong, verses 10. So that's one part. Now, in this case, it's about taking the blood, collecting it, and then pouring it at the altar. And the Kikuyus did that, and it is described the same in the Old Testament. Another part, here is another part where it describes something that happened, an activity that will happen, and it was so similar to how it is described in the ancient or in the Old Testament. It says, "When the meat is cooked, it is eaten by the elders, who each drink a horn of beer. The fat of the ram is boiled down in the cooking pot provided for the purpose, and one of the elders climbs into the sacred tree and pours the liquid fat on the main stem of the tree. The breast of the ram is often cut out and also hung up in the tree." Then he goes to read Exodus chapter 29, verses 26. "And thou shalt take the breast of the ram and wave it for a wave offering above the Lord." Yeah, so he talks about that breast of the ram being waved, and among the Akikuyu it will be hung on top of the sacred tree. Similar idea. Then there's something about the liquid fat being used to pour on the tree. By reading, and there are so many places in this book where he mentions the liquid fat being used to be poured all over the place on different things as blessing, as for some spiritual maybe goals or functions. And it became a realization to me as to why even today when you look at Christianity in Kikuyu land, there's a difference between it and Christianity in other parts of Kenya. The Kikuyu Christianity, there's so much fascination with oil. There's so much fascination with oil, and maybe if you're watching me and you understand or how things are happening around you, you'll realize that that's actually true. The Christianity in Kikuyu land is so fascinated with pouring of oil, while that's not the case in Christianity in other parts of the country, in Luo land, in Western, in Kisii land, in those other parts. The Christianity there is not so much focused, even though it could be happening, but not so much fascination with oil. Then it occurred to me that actually the oil part, it is in the Bible actually, but the Kikuyus find it so easy to incorporate that aspect into their Christianity because it was part of their belief system way before they became Christians. Maybe some people disagree with me, but that's the realization that came to me. Now, There is another part where he now talks about the Akamba, how the Akamba will sacrifice, and then he provides for us a verse in the Bible that aligns with that. And this is what he says. Among the Akamba, a black goat should be sacrificed for rain. A red one, however, is occasionally used. But whatever the color of the animal sacrifice, it is very important that it should be entirely of one color and not spotted or parti-colored. A parti-colored animal would probably be considered as having some blemish. So among the Kampa, when they sacrificed a goat, it had to be one color, the entire body. It will not be proper for it to have any other color on it. And this is also in the Bible, where Deuteronomy 18 verses 1, thou shalt not sacrifice unto the Lord thy God any bullock or sheep wherein is blemish or evil favoredness. So, and also Numbers 19 to speak unto the children of Israel that they bring thee red heifer without spot. So it was the same in the ancient Israelites, that they were expected to offer to God only animals that did not have any blemish. Now, I need to point something out. I read Herodotus' histories, and he does explain in detail some of the religious practices of the ancient Egyptians. And in the ancient Egypt, it was also the same requirement when they needed to sacrifice animals to any of the many gods that they worshipped, that it was a practice when before they sacrifice this animal, it will be put under very detailed inspection, looking at every part of the skin just to make sure that there is no any other color. If it's black, it should be black entirely. That even if there was one hair on the skin that was white and the rest of the body is black, that animal could not be sacrificed. That's how the ancient Egyptians would go about sacrifice, that aspect of making sure that there is no blemish on the animal. So it seems like this is a very common thing in very many societies, including those that are in East Africa. Now, there is another part. He again brings up the issue of scapegoating, but it's not actually the use of the goats. I did talk about scapegoating in another video, where I say that the AGIKUYU used to do the scapegoating, where they will kill a sheep, and then they will take part of it at least and throw it into the bush. And this is after the elders had prayed and believed that all the evils in the village and maybe diseases and whatever are put on the animal. And when they throw away the flesh to the bush, the evil is removed from the village. And the ancient Israelites used to do that. And in the ancient Israel, it used to be called the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. And I'm going to explain the details of that, because now there is a very similar practice among the Akamba that is exactly like the Yom Kippur procedures. And we are going to look at that, even though they did not use sheep. And this is what he says. The Kituyu of Akamba also have another curious ceremony, which they perform when their crops are in danger of being spoiled for lack of rain. They snare a couple of hirax, these are small animals, and carry them around the field containing the standing crops. One is then released. This is very important. One is then released. The other is killed. The heart, the contents of the stomach and the intestine of the victim are then taken and placed on fire, which is lit among the crops. The smoke of the sacrifice is said to be pleasing to the deity Engai. Then he gives us a verse, Exodus chapter 29, and burn them for sweet savor before the Lord. Now, I need to point out something that is the same as scapegoating. Now, here they are using these hirax animals. They have two. Then one is released and the other one is killed. Now, when you go to the ancient Israel, the Yom Kippur, they will have two sheep or two goat. And then the two will be brought to the high priest. And then the high priest will select one of the two. One will be killed, and the other one, they will pray over it and release it to the wild. Similar concept, don't you think so? So he says, the use of hirax for sacrificial purpose is rather curious and may well be a relic of an old Semitic belief in which the hirax was thought to have possessed originally the human shape. It was said that he who eats of its flesh will never see father and mother again. So these hierarchs, the choice of hierarchs was not accidental. So seems like, according to Hobley, seems like this was something that was again picked from elsewhere. And it is Semitic, which Semitic means, of course, Middle Eastern origins. So yeah, so those are some of the parts of Hobley's book where he tells us about the sacrificial practices of the Kikuyu and the Akamba, and then gives us the parallels that exist in the Old Testament of the Bible. Those are my random thoughts.